Lawyers of Reddit, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose and why? Not quite, but I did a trial where I won and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job and he thought I was excellent in trial. It was tough because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present, so it left me feeling weird. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ear, he took the kid to a chiropractor. Tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip: kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get. So my friend does some extra negotiating and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted. I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of shit. I can't really breach client confidences, but reading corporate emails by the truckload often makes me remark how careless many office drones and even executives could be with company-issued email accounts. In the early wilder days of the internet, many people didn't fully understand how fast things could travel. I got to read about office extramarital affairs, complete with super cringe love poetry, and all sorts of executive backstabbing. The executives at the European companies, not so much in the USA, seem to have a penchant for sending their favorite porn around. But none of that was really why I didn't like the clients. There was one company where the execs were big on canned game hunts both in the USA and abroad, and another where they seemed to spend some crazy amount of money on lobbyists that make almost every problem the country faces worse, and so on. At this point they are all kind of blending together. I worked at a civil firm and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant asshole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable shitholes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many people. Trying to defend this indefensible asshole against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Edit. Finding an excuse absolutely encompasses fabricating an excuse. Family lawyer here. Associate so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked. Heroin addicts. I had mom, but didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. Child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts. Crying face. I'm a law student but the place I worked at last summer was a civil litigation firm with one partner who did mostly criminal defense. None of the associate attorneys liked getting assignments from that partner, since none of them had really signed on to do criminal defense work. Anyways, one associate ended up having to write an appeal for a guy who was convicted of raping and murdering his young child. There was a serious constitutional violation that the appeal was based on, but realistically the entire office was hoping the appeal would be denied, including the associate who got stuck writing it. Edit. Don't know what happened. Not gonna say where it was. The associate tried his best. No one got disbarred. Yes, it sucked to work on it knowing the guy was guilty. Edit 2. Everyone deserves constitutional rights. What is wrong with you people? The problem was that the associate and I had signed on to do civil work, not criminal. It's insanely morally difficult to defend someone who did something inexcusable, even though you logically know that the Constitution and our system of law wouldn't work if no one was willing to defend the guilty. I have the highest respect for criminal defense attorneys. We knew he was guilty because of the serious constitutional violation involved. I truly believed the guy deserved another trial because of how egregious the violation was. We can't start cutting corners with our judicial system, and the system itself needs to be held accountable for its errors. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because client didn't take my advice. Maybe client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction to save money, usually, or time. Same thing. In those cases I am rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. You win some, you lose some, or if client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or, in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up, and I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where client has unreasonable demands or expectations and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being an asshole. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but a law student. My professors are both former prosecutors. They said that a lot of lawyers, particularly in the criminal world, have a lot of cases that they either don't care or hope they lose. For example, if you're public defender and you're defending some sort of rapist, pedophile, etc., you really hope they lose or at least don't walk. Public defenders absolutely have the shittiest job in law enforcement. You get assigned to defend a rapist and sadly many times an uninformed public will associate you with defending him and his behavior. A lot of guys being defended by a PD are staring down the barrel of a lot of time, and their win is a favorable plea deal. So many PDs hope their clients do lose, in the fact that they will still end up doing time. A PD is there, at least in the USA, to make sure a defendant's rights are protected and to make sure law enforcement follows proper procedures. On the prosecution side, there are sometimes pressures from the public, victims, etc., to get a conviction on someone, especially in a particularly nasty case. My professor said that many times like this, or smaller cases where they're thinking, this really isn't a big deal, but outside pressures are forcing me to prosecute, and they hope that the guy can walk. So yes, some lawyers do want to lose, unless they're getting paid on contingency, then they absolutely want to win.